Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this three-part series on understanding and responding to domestic and family abuse. My name is Carol Danby, and I am the current chair of the Joint Churches Domestic and Family Violence Prevention Project, which is a huge mouthful, which is a commission of the Queensland Churches Together. And we understand that we have people from Tasmania here with us this evening. We have people from Melbourne, Adelaide, but mostly the majority are from Brisbane, where Queensland Churches Together is housed here at in Milton. And we have people from North Queensland as well. So you are all most welcome. And we're still admitting people so I'll just give a couple more minutes. Right. To let you know that we are recording this session because some people have not been able to get away from work to be here, but definitely wanted to be with us if they could. So that we can share that with people who've registered afterwards. I have a candle in my hand, and I will start with this saying, which is, "It is better to light one candle than to curse the darkness." So we thank you for being one candle wherever you are that is going to light up the darkness of this scourge on our society, that is domestic and family abuse. And despite attempts by governments and agencies to reduce the incidence of domestic abuse, women in particular continue to be killed at a rate of more than one a week in Australia. But this is the tip of the iceberg, those that we hear across our news feeds. A significant number of people are suffering abuse and coercive control each and every day. And churches, or members of churches, often believe that domestic and family abuse does not happen within the families sitting in the pews. But research shows that intimate family violence happens in church congregations at the same rate as within the wider community. So our churches are not immune. Tonight we are going to learn a little bit more about that, and you perhaps are at different stages of understanding the domestic and family violence scene. So we over this next 3 weeks, we hope to have presentations that will be for beginners, people who are only just putting their toe in the water to understand what this is, as well as much more experienced people. And to commence, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather. Queensland Churches Together acknowledges traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises the continuing connections to lands, waters and communities. We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders past and present. So tonight's session is the first of three, as I said, one next Wednesday, the 28th, and the third on the 6th of March. And tonight we're covering what is domestic and family abuse with our guest speaker, who is Dr. Jeanette Phelan, who we'll introduce a little later. There will be some videos for you to watch, and then we will be moving into chat rooms to have some discussion with some questions that I will pose to you before we watch the videos. Just a few ground rules before we start, and I invite Reverend David Baker to pray with us. The ground rules: this is a safe and respectful and non-judgmental space. You do not have to remain in the Zoom meeting if you feel uncomfortable about anything being described or discussed. And we have someone here to ask questions of and direct your questions through the chat function on the Zoom. If you have any concerns, the presenter or the group, you can pose those in the chat. And anything of a personal nature shared here today will remain within this group. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Reverend David Baker, who is the General Secretary of Queensland Churches Together, and he is going to lead us in prayer. David is a Uniting Church minister and has been the moderator of the Uniting Church here in Queensland. And without further ado, over to you, David.
Thanks very much, Carol. It's good to be with you, folks, and good to see some, I was going to say old names there that I'm familiar, but I better say familiar names in the group. Particularly, I see Donna Muston from out in central Queensland, out in Longreach. So it's great to be able to share with you. And I guess for me, I always go to the biblical story for reflection and in a sense to help orientate, to ground ourselves and to help orientate ourselves to what we're looking at over the next couple of nights. And it was the story of the birth of Ishmael that came to me as I thought about the scriptures and what they might say about family and domestic violence. So I'm just going to reflect on that, read that short story in Genesis 16 and offer some short reflections. So this is the story of the birth of Ishmael from Genesis chapter 16. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bore him no children. She had an Egyptian slave girl whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abraham, "You see that the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, so go to my slave girl. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abraham listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abraham had lived for 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her slave girl, and gave her to her husband Abraham as a wife. He went to Hagar and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abraham, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my slave girl to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abraham said to Sarai, "Your slave girl is in your power. Do to her as you please." Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she ran away. The angel of the Lord found Hagar by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave girl of Sarai, where have you come from? And where are you going?" And she said, "I am running away from my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and honor her." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will so greatly multiply your offspring that they cannot be counted for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Now that you have conceived and shall bear a son, you shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has given heed to your affliction. He shall be a wild ass of a man with his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he shall live at odds with all his kin." So she named the Lord who spoke to her, "You are El Roi," for she said, "Have I really seen God and remained alive after seeing him?" Therefore the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. I think this story really speaks strongly to me because one, the stories of the scripture are absolutely kind of blatant about the sinfulness of the heroes of the Bible and their humanity and their failures. And I think that's quite a liberating thing for a faith to have those people who we see as heroes, but also to see that they are flawed human beings like the rest of us. We're not complete. But I think the other thing about this story that really kind of resonates with me is that in the midst of this woman being excluded and marginalized for no fault of her own, it is God who sees her. She names God, which is one of the few privileges of human beings in the scriptures, to encounter God and also to be able to name God. and she names God as El Roi. You are the God who sees. One of the issues that we face in family and domestic violence is sometimes, as in a pastoral context, we see a complexity and we are paralyzed and we don't know what to do, so we do nothing. And there's this issue around this kind of bystander effect. But what we see in this story is God does not stay a bystander. God enters into the story of Hagar, and God reaches out to her and restores her, and gives her space and her dignity anew and afresh. So for me, I think as we reflect over the next few sessions on family and domestic violence and the challenge that it lays before us as people of faith and as communities of faith who want to be the best we can be and want to create a positive space. This passage lays before us the responsibility to not look away from things, but to see that it is God who looks to things and addresses things. So I think of Hagar and I think of her naming God El Roi. You are the God who sees. You are the God who knows. And that we might be, by the end of this course, more confident, willing, and able to be people who see and who reach out and who respond to suffering that is around us. So let us pray. Loving God, we thank you for the privilege of being called into the vision of your purposes for creation and for humanity. We pray that as we journey together over the next couple of weeks in these sessions, that your Spirit will quicken us and enliven us, and that there will be insight for us and encouragement for us to be able to be more fully able to reflect your goodness and your purposes for the world. So just be over the presenters and our journey together, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. What a great story to start with. How interesting, and perhaps she was a little bit feisty with Sarah when Sarah couldn't bear a child, but then Sarah turns on her. So yes, some meaty stuff there for us to reflect upon. It is now my privilege to introduce to you our guest speaker for this evening, our presenter, and that is Jeanette Phelan, who is a psychologist and a teacher and has been an active member of Churches of Christ over many years. Her psychology practice focuses on mental health, education, and spiritual faith issues, as well as supporting people caught up in domestic and family violence. Jeanette has been actively involved in promoting women's issues and educational support throughout Queensland and Victoria, where she now lives, through her board memberships and her speaking and writing engagements. From 2015 to 2019, Jeanette was the QCT, Queensland Churches Together representative, on the Premier's Domestic and Family Violence Implementation Council. She chaired the Joint Churches Domestic Violence Prevention Project, of which I am now the chair, and was a member of the Churches of Christ Domestic Violence Task Force and the Churches of Christ Queensland Healing and Redress Committee. A very committed woman with lots to share with us. So without further ado, Jeanette is going to put up her slides and we are going to listen to what she has to tell us about this scourge on our society. Thank you, Jeanette.
Thank you, Carol. I appreciate that lovely introduction. So I've got the dubious task of doing an introduction into this whole area, and I'm aware that some of you have a lot of understanding of the area, others of you are relatively new. So I'm trying to find a meld of that, and in particular I want to talk about some of the developments in the area over the last few years. So if you'll give me a moment just to share my screen, and I will tell you a little bit more. So, just a definition to start with so that we're all on the same page about what we regard as domestic and family violence. There's a lot of definitions around there, but this is one that is fairly widely accepted. That DFV is any behaviour within a family or intimate relationship where one person seeks to control another through abusive tactics. And these abusive behaviours include, but are not limited to, physical, verbal, social, economic, psychological, stalking, cultural, spiritual, sexual, and emotional abuse. And it is recognised throughout Australia and in a lot of countries around the world as a crime. It encompasses a broad range of behaviours, and that's one of the struggles in terms of combating it, even recognising it, and certainly legislating against it. It can occur within any form of relationship towards any person and at any time. And throughout my life, I've been really surprised at some of the people who I have met, people I've known well for years sometimes, and not been aware that they were the victims of family violence. My mouse is oversensitive and it's going to jump through the slides, sorry. So a couple of examples, some my own personal examples. When my husband and I were young marrieds in our church, we met another couple who were a lovely couple, and I formed a really close relationship with. And we met with some other people as part of a small group over quite a number of years while I was a member of that church. Some years ago, I happened to run into her again after us losing contact. And she said to me, I believe that you're working in the area of domestic and family violence. And I said, yes, I have been. She said, well, I've got a story to tell you. She herself had been a victim of domestic and family violence throughout her life. Now, I thought I knew her really well, and I had no idea. She was one of the success stories that as she trained to be through nursing to become a counsellor and learning about this area and recognising it, she was actually able to confront her husband, and they were able to work out a plan where he could change and she could call him to account, and they're still together now. So that's one success story, but sadly not a lot of that way. So just a few stats just to give you an idea of why is this so important. Now, I'm not going to run through all these. Hopefully you can read them on screen unless you're on a small screen. But some pretty daunting ones. Some of them you will have heard of. Just the large number of women particularly, but also some men who are experience family violence. Look at the bottom one here, the difference between men and women. For women, it's most common if they experience it at the hands of an intimate partner. For men, it's more common at the hands of a male relative. Stats have shown about 95% of perpetrators, unfortunately, are male. That leaves a small proportion who are women, but mostly they are male. And certainly the overwhelming majority of victims are women. Majority of intimate partner homicides involve males killing a current or former partner.
Hi, Jenny. Hello.
Have a look down at the bottom stat here. This is particularly interesting because it relates to churches. Of those men who abuse their Christian wives, 1 in 5 attends a church regularly. Some research has shown that a lot of couples with DFV going on, the male is often on the fringe of the church, but not always. And certainly I've known couples who were a really important part of the church, really involved in church life, and it was going on. So it happens right across the board. And if we think that because of the nature of our Christian communities that we're immune, I challenge you really to think again, because it's not that way at all. unfortunately. So let's have a look at some of the legislation, and there've been a lot of changes in the legislation, certainly in the time that I've been working in the area. So I'm going to focus mostly on Queensland here, but I've got an acknowledgement particularly to Tasmania a bit later on. So the Domestic and Family Violence Protection Act in 2012, which has been constantly updated, is the act which deals with domestic and family violence. Now that moved on without me even touching it. And the Act defines the conduct of domestic violence as including so many different things. So if you have a look at that list there, we've got physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, economic abuse, threatening, coercive, controlling behaviour. And the two key things that you look for if you're trying to identify it is attempts by the perpetrator to control the other person, and a fearfulness in the victim about the reactions of their partner. So the Act covers these types of people, a lot of different relationships. So a whole lot of different intimate personal relationships, married and de facto, engaged couple relationships, parents of a child, and includes same-sex couples. And unfortunately, there's actually quite a high level of domestic and family violence within same-sex couples. Also within more extended family relationships, adult relatives, extended kinship, informal care relationships. Again, within care relationships, there is a high level of abuse, and people who are disabled, elderly people, are unfortunately disproportionately taken advantage of by people who are apparently in a caring relationship with them. So that is something to be alerted to. So here's some examples of the sorts of behaviour, but certainly this is not everything. So physical injury is the one that people often think of first. But some victims will say actually the physical injury is far easier to cope with than the emotional and psychological abuse, the gaslighting, the financial abuse, and other things like that. Interesting, the threats towards pets or actually physical injury towards pets. Someone who is a victim in a relationship can often feel like they've got no one to love, and they will turn to a pet. I know of situations, a little dog who my father adopted after, oops, we've got someone else who's screen shared here. I'm not sure what's going on here. Yes, so in this case, the little dog had the owner of the dog, she had gone out and purchased this beautiful pedigree dog as someone that she could love. And her partner used the dog as a way of abusing her. And when the dog came to my father, he was so frightened of other males. This lasted throughout his life. A strange male would come into the room and he'd go and hide and cower. So there's a whole range of problems: stalking, monitoring, texting 100 times a day. Those are all indications of difficulty with domestic and family violence. This here is known as the Duluth Power and Control Wheel. And it's a fairly well-known way of capturing most of the types of domestic and family abuse which happen. No, we seem to have lost my picture here.
We're able to see you, but not the.
Oh, what you can't see the screen.
Slides. No.
I can see the screen and not me. I'm sorry. Thank you, David. Let me just see. I'll just stop the show for a minute and see if we can do that again. Somewhere along the line, I lost the share screen here. Let's try this again. How's that? Better?
Yeah.
Good,
Yeah.
good. Thank you for telling me. And we've gone back one now. So I'll give you a minute to have a look at that one. I think you saw that actually before we had the interruption and you lost me. Just some different examples. Okay, so here's our power and control wheel. So you'll see it's divided into 8 overall categories. And certainly this now is quite old, but it's still the most commonly used model in the US, and it's used as a method of addressing an intervention. We are finding out more and more things, and other people are coming to find different ways of actually looking at different elements. So some of the elements that I've talked about more, like coercive control, are difficult to find within that, but they are there. So you've got using coercion and threats here, and a number of the others come into that as well. So this was actually developed in 2006, and it's still used a lot. It's really helpful for a victim because it can help them to understand what is happening to them and the extent of their abuse. And I've used this with victims where I've said, have a look and just tick each of those segments according to, do you see this happening in your relationship? And often when we finish, both them and I are horrified at how much is going on, because it's a slow burn thing. It starts often subtly and it builds so that a victim doesn't realise they're in it until sometimes it is pretty overwhelming. So I'm going to run through a couple of different types of abuse, and particularly ones that have been talked about more recently. Physical abuse is the one we first think about often when we talk about family violence. And but one of the things that the Premier's Council found, and particularly through the Domestic Violence Death Review Board, was the importance of recognising choking and attempted strangulation. And you can see there all the different evidence of it. It can actually be something that a perpetrator will do, and they'll say either it's rough play in sex or, oh, I didn't mean anything by it. But often it will leave no marks. But the things you look for are things like what's happening in the scalp, the ears, the eyes, face. I was quite surprised when I heard of cases of victims whose partner had indulged on one or a few occasions of strangulation, and it resulted in acquired brain damage. And those neurological signs are things that they then had to live with. They were damaged for the rest of their lives. So it can be permanent. And the biggest thing is that it is a sign, it is a strong sign that the victim's life may be in real danger. A lot of the women in Queensland who have died through domestic and family violence have had some previous history of choking. So coercive control, hopefully most of you will have heard about the legislation passed by the Queensland government last year to legislate against coercive control and have it recognised as a form of domestic and family violence. It's a really subtle and really difficult to get a handle on, which is why I think it's a later thing that states are introducing. It's ongoing coercion rather than a single violent event or episode. And In isolation, any behaviour appears trivial. And over again, I've had clients telling me, oh, he spoke angrily at me, or he texted me and told me I was out of line. And you think, yeah, but it's the accumulation, it's the drip, drip, drip effect that wears away at a victim's sense of self-worth, their capacity to act according to their own free will, and leaves them absolutely trapped in this cycle of abuse and this belief that there's no way that I can get out of it. Coercive controllers don't just abuse their partners to hurt, humiliate, or punish. They use particular techniques over an extended period of time, techniques such as isolation, hurtful put-downs, gaslighting, financial control and surveillance, in order to gradually strip away their liberty and take away their sense of self and their concept of what is normal behaviour in an intimate relationship. It's a systemic group of behaviours, and it lies behind a lot of those things in the Deloth Wheel and a lot of what we see in domestic and family violence. Jackie's got a video which we're going to share, which is a friend of Hannah Clark's, who talks a little bit about Hannah Clark's situation.
The impact of losing Han, Aaliyah, Leanna and Trey has been never ending. They were in every part of my life. There was one day when I left the gym, I gave Anna a hug and she just embraced me with this. She's a little 4-year-old girl, but she gave a hug like no one else I've ever experienced. And I came back the next day to the gym and I was like, geez, Anna gave me such a beautiful hug yesterday to Han. And she goes, yeah, I know, I said that to her. And she said, she said, yeah, I know, I just feel like he needs bigger hugs because he's always by himself. And so a little 4-year-old girl, right? And that was the kind of heart that all of them had. I definitely had a stronger bond with Han. Han and I just were on the same page and on the same level for a lot of different things. We had this thing, you'll see on my whiteboard over there, it says, leave it at the door. That was something that we took into the gym with us every time, or we didn't take into the gym, right? As soon as we got to the gym, we put all our stuff down at the door, our emotional baggage, all that sort of stuff. We went in and we did the job. She did that incredibly well, given everything that she was dealing with. At the time, there were certain things that I felt uncomfortable with, like the way he spoke to her when we were training, like when the kids would fight over an iPad or something like that when we were all training, all 3 of us were training, he would yell at her and say, the kids are your responsibility, you know, you're the woman, you're the mother, go and look after the kids, rather than standing right next to the kids and yelling at Hannah to say, you know, this is your job. At the time I was like that, I mean, they're right there, you can deal with that situation, you know, it just seemed uncomfortable. Yeah, I've learned so much about coercive control since Han died and the kids. I think it's hard to pinpoint the main things that I've learned about it, but those big key factors of what DV looks like as a relationship are really important. The power imbalance, the fact that one person is trying to use power and control over the other person and they're doing that through that pattern of controlling behaviours. The fact that coercive control includes a variety of different behaviours that may not include violence, may not include physical abuse. And then that fear and anxiety and the reason why someone might feel like they need to stay in that relationship, right? Like the safety of their children, the safety of themselves may depend on being inside that relationship. So starting conversations early, recognizing, getting education around what coercive control is really important, because the laws won't save everyone. They might save a few, but ultimately it's going to take a cultural change to save people's lives. Australia needs to change the way we view violence. We need to change the way we view women. We need to improve on the way that we treat each other. So if we're going to do that, it's going to start with conversations with our friends, with our family.
I think Ben says it's so much better than I could. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. So coercive control. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of an understanding. It's interesting to see. I did some research on where each state is at in terms of their legal situation. As we know, Queensland legislated against it last year. I believe we've got at least one person here from Tasmania. Well, they win the prize as being the first state to criminalise coercive control back in 2022, followed by New South Wales, although that's been slow coming in, South Australia in 2023. In Victoria, we've been discussing it for quite some time. There've been a lot of community consultation. It's got to the stage of getting parliamentary recognition, but there's been no law passed to talk about coercive control as domestic and family violence in its own right. Hopefully it will come. WA, again, community consultation, but there doesn't appear to be any legislation at the moment. The territories haven't been able to find anything. Federal government has completed a consultation process, and it's in the process of developing some national principles around coercive control. So just to give you a feel of where everyone's at. And if you're working in this area, you need to be aware that the domestic and family violence laws are particular to each state. So you'll find that there are differences between states, and you need to check on what the laws are in your local area if you're trying to work and advocate for a victim. So let me move on and talk a little bit about what are our churches doing about it. I got into this area because I felt like this was both a Micah responsibility and part of Jesus' original mission statement when he first stood up and read from Isaiah in the synagogue about supporting the victims, releasing the captives from prison. So starting off with the Royal Commission into Family Violence in 2016, and it recognised the importance of faith communities and the part they have to play. Our faith communities should be a sanctuary. Until now, what we've been able to do has been limited by a lack of current Australian data, and thankfully that has changed over the last few years. The Anglican Synod were amongst the first to investigate the prevalence of domestic and family violence in a really widespread study. And I'm going to quickly run through the results of that. The main one is that there's significant interpartner violence within the church. So the results of the National Anglican Family Violence Project were released in 2021, and you see here some of the most important findings. The prevalence among Anglicans was the same or higher than in the wider Australian community. We've got no reason to believe that any other denomination is any different. Women were much more likely than men to have experienced interpersonal violence. No surprise, same as in the community. Most victims didn't seek help from Anglican churches. Now, in my research, I've read recently that some studies in other churches have shown that perhaps that is tipping over and changing as we become more informed and are more able to take appropriate action. So let's hope that that continues. Clergy and lay leaders were well informed about the breadth of interpartner violence, but were less aware of its prevalence in the church communities, which is why we're doing the sort of work that we are doing like now. Having women on the pastoral team helps to equip the church. A clergy were confident to not so confident to respond to it. And again, it's important that those people who are in those roles actually know what to do. And very commonly, perpetrators misuse Christian teachings and position of power. All right, we'll get onto that slide that's been wanting to come on for a while now. These are the 10 commitments that the Anglicans came up with for preventing and responding to domestic and family violence. And I'll just quickly run through, give you time to have a look at them. Acknowledgement and lament that the violence has been suffered and had been unaddressed. Committing to ensure that conditions and church culture actually are supportive and helpful to prevent it continuing. Teaching about equality, freedom from violence and respect for relationships, and honouring and valuing every person. Affirmation that human relationships should be based on respect and mutuality, and that's very biblical. Acknowledging different experiences of all people and treating those experiences with respect and consideration. Church actions being directed by the gospel of love, peace, and justice. And supporting cultural change in our communities so that victims are not afraid to speak up, and so that church members know how to support their victims. Number 8, training, which is very much where JCDVPP come in, to training to understand and to be equipped to respond to domestic and family violence in appropriate ways. Holding leaders and pastoral staff to account, and regularly reviewing and improving commitments. I've just run through them quickly, and I'm aware that we've got a whole range of churches here, but what the Anglicans have done is a bit of a model for some of the things that the other churches are taking on, and most churches I've found are doing something now. We've got, when I researched, the Uniting Church, the Lutheran Church, Salvation Army, Presbyterian, Baptists actually had information online about domestic and family violence within their churches. And I'm personally aware of work being done within Churches of Christ, and I know that other denominations are doing stuff as well. So the other big one to look at in comparison is what the Catholics are doing. And let's try to find my notes on Catholics, just a moment. Yeah. The Diocese of Broken Bay's Catholic Life and Faith Formation Team in Pennant Hills, New South Wales, has released a wonderful resource titled A Catholic Response to Domestic Violence. And this is part of a parish kit which aims to assist parishes to respond to those experiencing domestic violence or those that are seeking help for violent behaviours. And this kit is available to download. So you can see down the bottom there, you can take a screen grab or quickly write down where the resource is available if you wish to follow up on this. From Pope Francis, I think particularly of the shameful ill treatment to which women are sometimes subjected, domestic violence and various forms of enslavement, which, rather than a show of masculine power, are craven acts of cowardice. The verbal, physical and sexual violence that women endure in some marriages contradicts the very nature of the conjugal union. According to canon law, a spouse who occasions grave danger of soul or body to the other or to the children, or otherwise makes the common life unduly difficult, provides the other spouse with a lawful reason to leave, either by decree of the local ordinary, or if there is danger and delay, even on his or her own authority. So we have a range of responses from different churches, and we will talk more in our later sessions about how, as an individual church community, and as individuals within that community, we can respond appropriately. We'll also talk more about the biblical background for our stance, which I certainly believe is very strong. So I want to pass back now to Carol, who's going to take you through some case studies, some women's stories. I don't think, yeah. Carol, you're muted. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeanette, for that overview of a distressing statistics and so much, but heartening that churches are beginning to listen. In my own parish, I'm from the Catholic tradition, and in my own parish, I had 40 of our books from Queensland churches together on display in May, and 40 of them went within a couple of Sundays. And in one community, to have that many books being taken up made me realise how hidden it is, even in my community. So then I showed a video of the Australian Catholic bishops. It was a 4-minute video where they denounced violence in intimate relationships, and a woman at the back stood, and I just said, "Thank you for staying." It was after the service, and she said, "No, thank you." And I said, didn't do much. And she said, the fact that we were showing and speaking about it openly, I felt, she didn't say any more than that, but I felt that she was definitely someone who she was feeling affirmed in finally being able to actually, someone acknowledging it, our church community acknowledging it. So without further ado, we have 3 videos from the Queensland Government website, and there are many more, but we've chosen 3, and which we're going to show you now. And just a couple of things to consider while you're watching these very short grabs. It's a little bit like the one we heard from Ben about Hannah Clark and her children. I heard her mother speak on the news the other day, and that family lives in hell. She said, time does not heal, it only, it's with them all the time. So some things to consider while watching these short grabs are, for example, what sorts of abuse do you observe in each of these? The verbal, is it physical? Is it coercive? Is it stalking? Just have a bit of an idea of what kind of abuse you might be witnessing in the video. Each of these videos have a positive message. These are actually survivors and thrivers. So they have something to tell us about how they got out of their situation. So what positive messages could you take from them? And is there anything that stands out for you? Because they're what we're going to discuss in our chat rooms after we've witnessed these 3 videos. So over to Jackie now, please, to show us. I think it's Angie is the first one. Thank you.
He just went off at me in such an unreasonable way, telling me that I was idle, you're useless, I've asked you to do one thing today and you can't even do that. What is the point of you? And with that, he stormed off and went down the pub. He came back some hours later, very drunk, and walked into the house. I was upset, and he just started smashing the house up. The next thing, he went to the kitchen, got a large carving knife out the chop block and started gouging the kitchen tops up with it, and then pointed the knife at me. I ran from the house. I didn't even have any shoes on, and I walked around the village for a long time. Then I came back to the house and I was too frightened to go in, and there was a shed at the bottom of the garden that the builders were using to store equipment in, and I lay down on a bag of concrete for the night. I was 18 and he was 32, and I was just literally I was swept away by this guy, you know, swept up in the, I don't know, he just seemed to know all the places to go. You know, he was taking me up to London to these nightclubs, and, you know, taking me out and buying me clothes and taking me into places and getting my hair done. That's when it started. He would say to me, you know, I know what would look best on you. You don't want to have your hair. I've booked you an appointment and I've told the stylist how I want it done for you. Only I know what looks good on you. And it snowballs. And that's how it starts. What you find is 40 years later, you're finally getting out of it, and you cannot get those 40 years back. I would say the relationship was predominantly, it was coercive control, but within there was physical attacks. He even had a webcam put in on the upstairs, and if he wasn't in the house, he could view it from his phone, and he would ask me, I haven't seen you go up the stairs. Are you being idle? Because if you're being idle, I can find you plenty to do. That's not what I pay you for. I would say to all Queenslanders that we all have a part to play in this as human beings. And if we just keep burying our head in the sand and going, well, it's somebody else's problem, let somebody else deal with that, then you're part of the problem. But if you're a guy down the pub and you're listening to your mate talking about his wife in terms that, you know, you're like, no, that's, you know, I would say to you, start keeping a close listen. Watch for his behaviour.
I wanted my marriage to work, so I felt obligated to be on my husband's side. And so I just became like a child. Like, he had full control, he had full say. So I just went along with it, and I let him, in front of my eyes, abuse my child, you know, and I've got to live with that now. And you can see the result of that in him. Being a chess player is really how he manipulated me. So putting me into positions where the logical choice was to do what he was suggesting. He'd never say that I couldn't work, or he'd never say, my job's to do the housework and he has the final say on things. It would just be more manipulative. So I had my own business, and one of my clients was in Melbourne. And when I was in Melbourne, my daughter had an accident against coffee table at childcare and cut her eye, and so he had to go to hospital with her to deal with that. And I got the abuse I copped. I had to get on the next plane. I got back as soon as I could, and then I didn't get spoken to for a week because, you know, I wasn't there, and that's my role. What finally made me leave was, at this point, I had no job anymore. I told my daughter not to worry studying. Like, I've got a master's degree in education. I told her not to bother, because why bother learning? Why bother doing any of it when you're just going to be a housewife? And that came out of my mouth to my 9-year-old. What the hell? I just crashed. I just thought, I think I might kill myself. I don't see any point of living now, because what's the point? What's the point of my life? I stopped dreaming. You know, I stopped believing that there was a future, because everything was about what he wanted, where he wanted to go, what he wanted to do. And anytime I had a dream, it got, you know, taken away from me. Coercive control is real, and you don't have to be hit to be hurt. And if you're afraid and you're in fear and you no longer, like, someone's controlling you, I know that you can get help, and there is support out there for you. Right now I am acting organisational development manager at my workplace. I make a difference to people's lives, and am able to speak out in things like this, where I can hopefully be a beacon to other people that may not even realise they're in an unhealthy relationship, but to get that help. Personally, I've met a man, my mum passed away in 2016, and I honestly, I could cry, honestly believe that she brought me an angel, because he is beautiful, and he's even written me a note over there to say, you know, you be strong, you're a beautiful woman, and that you can make a difference to other people. So, you know, he's really proud of me. He's behind me 150%, and I'm blessed. So I'm thankful to whatever universe led him to me.
Everybody loved him. He had a great personality that anyone who met him was his friend. My family loved him instantly. His friends told me how lucky I was, and that it was great he'd found somebody to settle down with. My neighbours were there when everything went down, and I got home late from a funeral, and he'd met me at the door with a fist. And my neighbour heard the entire thing from when I got home to when I was inside. And she tells me it was about 3 minutes. So for 3 minutes, I laid on the floor and I copped blow after blow from a metal pole until it snapped and I was able to run. He isolated me from customers at work where I wasn't able to speak to them as much because he would be across the road watching me at work, and I'd get messages to my phone that I'd spoken to somebody for too long, or what was that person doing and who was there, what was I speaking about. In hospital, when I had the doctors setting my arm and my hand in a cast and explaining the extent of my injuries and how a slightly different blow or a slightly different weapon could have been my life, I had my phone in my hand reading an "I'm sorry" text from him, ready to forgive him. And I think if it hadn't been for the doctors telling me and my neighbours making that step to call the police, that it was them who extracted me safely. And I'm so glad that they did, because I obviously wasn't there yet. I would have still been in that situation, not knowing when enough was enough. It got me to be in the hospital alone with nobody to call, and the doctors telling me, "Sweetie, that's not okay." And that was when I realised, like, it could be different. I can be free. It was hard afterwards to find my strength to be courageous and get my power back. But I think with having my entire family around me when it happened, they were probably my strength for me when I didn't have it. Everything happy in my life right now, my partner and my animals, just being here, my home finally feels like a home. Like, I have a great life beyond here. I have a great job, I have a great family, I have great friends. But I think for me, being able to come home to a home that feels like a home, that I had that missing for so long that I don't know, I can't take that for granted now. I just can't. I don't feel like scared or worried. Like, he makes me feel safe. He makes this house feel safe. It's just, yeah, it's something that I was missing for so long. I didn't have something that felt like a safe, loving relationship. And I got it. I found it.
Oh, I remember going to that website, and I think I managed to listen to about 8 of those video clips, and then I just had to go for a long walk. It was just too much. So perhaps 3 even is too much for us all. But we're going to move into chat rooms now, where we can discuss those questions that I shared with you before the videos, or anything else that people might like to discuss. So what abuse did you observe? Physical, verbal, and so on, coercive control. What positive messages can you take from them, and what stood out for you? So over to Jackie now to put us into our chat rooms. Thank you.